welcome to the channel. My name is Kuber. I'm a CICC licensed immigration consultant, and I do this because I love it. Loving this season is also part of this whole positivity that is that's all around us at this point of time. But what is not positive, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is the outlook for the international students. Obviously, the current students who are currently in Canada, the people who achieve or rather obtain their postgraduate work permits, they already know how difficult the whole situation is in terms of not getting postgraduate work permit extensions, not getting the jobs you wanted, pathways feeling very, very difficult. And then the recent announcement by Mark Miller, which said that he is looking to rein in, that was the words used, rein in the temporary foreign workers, and also indicated that the housing crisis in Canada, which is looking so critical at this point of time, is also partially partially because of international students and the foreign workers. So discussing on this subject is a very good friend who is a Canadian immigration lawyer in Vancouver, and his company is called Heron Law Firm. Will Tao. Will, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much for having me, Kubir, and it's long overdue. I apologize. It took so long for me to show up, but I'm here in all my holiday spirit.
Excellent. Holiday spirit for everybody out in Canada. I mean, I guess, guys, there are a lot of people still on a holiday at this point of time, so happy holidays. And as we continue to the new year, what are you seeing? What is your crystal ball telling you in regards to what international students who are preparing to come to Canada, how's it looking like for them?
I hate to be the Grinch, but it's looking kind of grim. I think that, I think the writing is in the wall. The proof is in the pudding. You know, we're just waiting for what those measures are going to be in 2024. But call it economics, politics, whatever you want it to be. I don't think there's really any way around it. We're going to have much less temporary residence. And unfortunately, what I see is that it's not going to be a shared burden of, loss of spaces, so to speak. And I know we'll get into that conversation of whether there's actual targets or if this is going to be done in another. I do it in a very direct way of saying here, how much we're going to cut down right off the bat. But, it's going to be folks from certain countries that have historically high refusal rates or high admittance rates that they want to lower, right? And so I don't see the ETA countries, for example, overnight, getting canceled or, having month delays on an ETA. I see it really going to the heart of temporary resident visas, study permits, work permits from global south countries and from countries where they're going to alter the numbers. So that it's disheartening. I'm a little sad, but I think it's maybe inevitable is the word I'm grappling with.
I mean, if you look at the numbers, 500 to 600 international students last year, 900,000 plus and counting this year, the number of temporary residents in Canada now exceeding 2.5 million people. Within the last few months, when Canada hit that milestone of 40 million in terms of population, and within 4 to 5 months, we have seen a 1% increase. Now we have 430,000 people more than that. Yeah. That is scary with the way the growth is happening and the infrastructure not being able to keep up. Is that the biggest reason?
I think so, but I'm someone who, when it comes to data around immigration, I always put a caution sign that we don't collect it fully. Yeah. There's so many questions we don't ask on censuses. There's so many things we just don't know. Even like, for example, the undocumented, where we're going to have this whole public policy, rolled out for how many people we don't know. But the number of undocumented folks, I mean, I'm sure you know as well, from anybody who runs a practice, you see folks come in that will likely not show up on those censuses, right? Yeah. So I do think that there is obviously a population growth issue. I haven't really, to be very honest, I need to spend more time looking at the whole birth rate decline versus, numbers versus how many folks are actually going to help build the houses and build the infrastructure versus how many folks are absorbing the infrastructure. Like, that's all a whole discussion, right? And again, another one that might not show up in data. But what is very clear, I think, is the political will in Canada is towards lessening the number of folks because of the perception that the more folks are coming in are, again, perception may be backed by economics that the folks that are coming in are taking up housing, taking up healthcare, taking up food, taking up all the different things. Whether that's true or not, again, to be honest, I have to spend a little more time researching the data from various sources, because I'm someone who questions and interrogates data. I don't take data at face value, even within own immigration reports. I don't trust data right off the bat. I need to spend time with it. And I'm not a data person, right? So I need to get the experts and have people have conversations about it.
Sure. I mean, but if we go with the data that is available of the books that we're looking at, of the media releases and the articles and the Stats Canada, and just on the superficial level, on the overview,
Sure.
Considering that this data does not include a lot of people, which basically only makes it scarier, not anything less. 2.5 million people, temporary residents, immigration levels plan, which indicated about 485,000 as the immigration target for 2024. It doesn't seem to add up. What's going to happen with all these other people? Is that cliched statement that, hey, you said you are coming to Canada on a temporary resident, now go back because your job's done. Is that how it's going to be played out to them?
Yeah, I do think that there will be definitely more pressure on holding folks to their statements and to what they say and to their plans. But also, I mean, something I don't think we track, and I'd always be curious about this data, is how many folks are actually, coming here but actually going to leave. Because I think it does depend on the country of origin. I think it does depend on, like, for example, I have a large Chinese client base. Being Mandarin speaking, I can handle a lot of those clients. A large proportion of Chinese students that are coming to Canada, at least from my client base, which could be itself very, selection bias, they're so excited to go back because this ticket in Canada of studying is the golden ticket to salary increase in China, where things are actually prosperous, where they can actually find jobs that are worth their value. So I think one of the things we should do really quickly in this conversation is actually study who wants to stay and who wants to go, why, and maybe collect some data on that. And I don't know how much of that we actually have versus sort of the whole funneling of the 2.5 million into 485,000 spots. Yes, it's very concerning on the face, but I have questions about who are the ones staying, what are they staying on? Similar question to refugee claimants too, right? And that's another related topic. You see Steve Murin's, posted recently about the different schools and different individuals who are claiming refugee status. Like, how many of those folks does the system perceive are actually, an adverse outcome versus, unfortunately, with our overseas refugee system, that's almost impossible to navigate. Like, this is the only way to come and make a refugee claim. And we shouldn't view that as adverse. We should view that as Canada actually helping folks, right? And the study permit or the visitor visa is the only way to get here to make that claim. So, again, I see the number surface issue, but I'm someone who always says, I want to learn a little bit more. Let's dig a little bit deeper. There are questions we haven't asked yet.
Well, fair point as to there could be a percentage of these individuals who would be looking forward to going back. But in again, it's an opinion. It's not data, because there is no specific data. There is no way to collect that reliable data to say how many actually intend to not want to go back. Because the whole package of the international student pathway or the whole international student program, the way the whole thing is packaged, and you're referring to the Chinese client base, I'm going to refer mainly to the subcontinent client base, and even the Middle East for that matter, where again, there's a lot of influx of people from subcontinent anyways. But the way it is packaged to all these guys in the subcontinent and in lots of other, I mean, even Africa for that matter, even Nigeria.
Absolutely.
It's packaged in a manner that if you come to Canada as an international student, you are pretty much done. You're one foot's on the door anyways, and permanent residence is not too far from there on. And people buy into that narrative, and preparing your SOP, as they call it, statement of purpose, or your submissions to say that, hey, I will go back. That is just one way of preparing your application. The intention can change, right? So that's the only debate.
It can change the day after you submit your application. We know very well that that's the case.
And since Canada does allow dual intent, and dual intent is an absolute accepted and permissible factor. So with all these guys who are now in Canada, hoping, praying that they will find a pathway, how do these guys then react to?
Yeah, that's such a tough question, because as you like, the first step is the closing the gates, right? The what's going to happen is this idea that if you're overseas and you are again, I think they're going to use a lot of data and statistics to say that these individuals either have a propensity not to leave, or they have, a high refusal rate, whatever that might be. The gates will be closed, right? So the number of folks coming in, we're probably going to limit it to like tier 1, maybe some of the top of the tier 2, but like they'll start using that tiering system even in more sort of full robust nature to skim off those individuals that they think either are going to leave or are not at a risk of non-compliance, right? And unfortunately, that is, as the minister said, not punishing individuals per se, but the problem is the systemic. When you try to view everyone as a representative of that individual, as a representative of a whole group, that might be even more problematic, to be honest, right? Because you're starting using these stereotypes, the data, etc. That's step 1. Close the doors. Step 2, what are the people inside? What are you going to do with them? Because even that doesn't solve the numbers problem, as you aptly put it, right? So then what does the next step entail? I think it entails, unfortunately, a lot of folks having to leave Canada, and it'll be refusals on extensions. It'll be refusals for funds, for inability to leave Canada. The one thing that hasn't been in place, and I hope and I pray it doesn't continue, but back in the first wave of the Conservative government, we had a lot of the enforcement. I would say actually pre-COVID, the enforcement was much stronger of these things, right? The letter wasn't like you can leave and months later, years later, no one's actually knocking on your door. I really hope it doesn't come to this, but I do fear where we're heading. Enforcement is the way to get the numbers down, and I say this with a lot of trepidation, but I see that as on the horizon, unfortunately, right? And that's just the nature of immigration when it comes down to changes in attitudes, I feel.
I mean, we're not the US where IRS or immigration authorities can come knocking on your door and say, okay, show me your status. I don't like the fact that you're not in status. Leave right now. We put you in handcuffs, put you in those vans and take you away.
Well, okay.
I know.
8 years ago, it was like, honestly, there was folks that were driving in the car the day after their permit expired. They were still eligible for restoration. But because they got into traffic stop, and again, we fixed a lot of these kind of reporting mechanisms of police to this, and sanctuary cities, etc. There's things that are positive steps, but folks used to be the day after. I had several clients actually, some that were looking on the streets for somebody else, but this person matched the description, and they found out they had no status. Next thing you know, they're removed. I had another individual the day after their study permit expired. They were in a traffic stop as a passenger. But then because of the IDing of everyone, they found they had no status. Removed. So I think that, and at that time, actually, to be honest, we were all discussing the US was actually lenient because they lost track. They couldn't keep up with it. And in Canada, they actually could, right? So I think that sometimes there's a bit of a false comparison that the US system is so, terrible, and Canada has this most humane system. No, honestly, I think the U.S. is actually looking towards Canada with a lot of the way that we organize things and actually track things and have the data for things and know where people are. Again, with the undocumented situation, that's going to be very, very difficult. But I really do fear that enforcement is the next step to controlling numbers. I hope this minister still gives that leeway, gives that grace period, makes the case, the business case. Maybe that's part of it. Go home for a couple more years, increase your scores and come back. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's another incentive, right? To adjust express entry so foreign work experience becomes some sort of necessary aspect to coming back. I don't know. But, there's going to have to be creative solutions like that, I would hope, other than, CBSA showing up at your door.
Well, I mean, you bring up a very interesting, point there. I know recently CBSA, when I'm saying recently, I mean a few months back, CBSA's authority in turning up at the employer's doorstep and wanting to audit and check who's in status and out of status, that basically was implemented or made effective again. But to come back to the point that if up to 5, 6, 7, 8 years back, if police or of anybody for that matter, anybody in authority could question your status and then put you in a van and take you away, if that was the case, how did Canada land up with 600,000 plus undocumented people. I mean, I know we are sort of we are steering away from the main subject, but just out of curiosity,
this is all interesting. I think this is all related to the kind of concerns that international students have, and again, each of the examples
right
are provided were international students.
I can guarantee you a lot of international students and of course the workers are thinking that if Canada is going to give amnesty to the undocumented workers, could this be an option for me? Should I become undocumented as well? Stay here for 4, 5, 6 years and then what? Maybe have another amnesty.
I mean, we'll have to see how that program is operationalized. Again, I think I posted this on Twitter, but I think there's going to be a very, very high threshold. I don't think it's going to be a matter of a couple of years, right? Because if you put a couple of years on the line, like anyone with a couple of years of experience, it's definitely going to go before COVID, right? I think that's sort of inevitable. And if you put a very high threshold, how many folks does it encourage to come out of sort of the precarity to apply? That's going to be one question. And then the other one is, inevitably there's not going to be enough spots. They're not creating a program just because of perception alone, right? Because, these international students who may have been here for 3-4 years and now are, or even longer, some of them are even here as elementary school students who can't qualify for the economic streams, right? Because their scores aren't high enough or they're not being selected. And now suddenly on the one end, you're helping undocumented folks who may have been here for just marginally a little bit more time, right? So I think it would probably be problematic to do a grand amnesty program amidst these times, right? With limiting folks. And again, that's the thing I think the government doesn't understand also is like, the picture being portrayed of these international students are ones that have arrived like last year on like 1 year diploma programs who've been here for 8 months or whatever. And, whether they go back or not, it's not a big deal. But no, I mean, that's maybe part of the program and part of the challenge that they want to solve. But I'm sure as well, Kabir, that how many clients you have in your office that have been here for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, maybe had some academic struggles, started here in elementary school, did high school here, and now, they're at this point where they still can't get selected. I mean, their language is good, but maybe they didn't get into a bachelor's program or they don't have a job or whatever it might be. This is a much more complicated issue than just a couple bad actors, removing a couple students from Canada. That's not it, right? So I do really fear that we definitely have a problem at our hands, given the numbers of people inside Canada for sure. I think that's inevitable. My only hope is that we create broader programs, absorb them while we maybe limit the number of people coming into Canada and build that way, as opposed to like this one massive sweep of just trying to like ask people to leave. That to me is the most scary outcome. And I hope one that we can avoid. I don't think that would be a good look for our system moving forward. Right.
I agree with you. With this undocumented workers, one thing that has come forward was that Ontario already has a similar program where construction workers were sort of, encouraged, or rather people who are undocumented but who are construction workers who had a pathway. And Mark Miller also indicated that they may be looking at certain occupations. If there were undocumented workers within certain occupations, those probably will have a pathway. So there would be some sort of criteria that would be applied. My question then comes up is that, how do you prove that work experience? Because if you are undocumented, you couldn't have had a SIN or a valid SIN. Basically means you were being paid in cash. So if you're being paid in cash, how difficult it is for anyone to create these pay stubs and say, hey, listen, I also have work experience in this particular occupation. I mean, currently already, you and I, we both sit in those hubs where we are surrounded by these kind of characters, unscrupulous, whereby running a payroll, fraudulent payroll, I would like to call it out clearly, whereby running a fraudulent payroll is now become quite common, whether it is in Vancouver, Surrey area, whether it is in Toronto, certain areas of Toronto. Would you not then be encouraging more of those activities in such manner if you try to identify a specific occupation and say, okay, these people would be preferred?
Yeah. I mean, bringing it to your international student thing too, just to draw a broader context, like when you increase the financial requirements as they have, like I think you're also encouraging in that sense folks to figure out a way to borrow the funds, or the lending that backs those practices will increase. So I think it's almost a cat and mouse game with any change to restrict a category. will lead to people trying to get into that category to do exceptional things to try and do it. But I mean, I agree with you. I think that's where we have to be. And if I were, to speak to those individuals who might be in the middle of those schemes right now, or, on the other side, preparing to apply and having that promise, is you have to be extra diligent during this time and extra vigilant during this time, because, I think to be very honest, especially to those who are acting, the consequences, especially criminally, have still been relatively low bar, right? Like slap on the wrist, exactly. Little house arrest. Folks are not, I mean, half these folks aren't even here in Canada, right? They're overseas with no sort of impact on the law's reach. I know I do see some of the raids that are happening in India, for example, but I think that if the government wants to turn on the enforcement arm, which I think they may, right? And especially if we're heading towards where I think politics is heading towards a more enforcement-based system, these consequences can increase, and it could be increasing for those folks, increasing definitely for the applicants, right? A misrepresentation is never now a 5-year, go away for 5 years, come back later. It's with Chinook, with the risk flagging, as you highlighted in the intro to this thing. These consequences could very well extend beyond 5 years. There's a refusal ground that says because of your previous non-compliance and previous activities in Canada, we're going to deny you. So a 5-year misrep bar could turn into a decades-long, 20-year, 30-year, whoever knows how many year inevitable bar, not written on paper, but when it comes down to limiting spaces, are you going to allow in that tier 1 who has a clean record, or someone who's committed a misrep in the last 5 years? Well, probably the person with the clean record and the U.S. visa, as opposed to the person with the past misrep, right? So I think folks have to be more careful on all ends of the spectrum in terms of the issue you're raising. And again, for undocumented workers, I do see that concern. And I only hope that applicants take some time to reach out to competent counsel and actually have a conversation about this, right? Because it goes beyond just, and some folks think very short term. I'm going to get my permanent resident, I'll sleep through that night, and suddenly my mind will clear through of all the things that I did in the past, the transgressions. This will be off my consciousness. We're permanent residents now. It's all good. Well, as someone who represented several clients during the UCAN scams, during several other scams, including the ones that are in out of the Vancouver Surrey region, including South Asian Indian cases. These are folks that have been permanent residents sometimes for 5, 10, 15 years, and they are being dragged through the mud because of something they did back then, right? So I don't know about you, but for me personally,
it can always come back and haunt you. Yeah, that's
a lot of sleep to lose, right? And which I hope that folks understand, like, take the time to figure out a legitimate pathway, and don't get caught up in these quick promises, because they will bite back at sometime down the end of the day, right? And either that way or even in tax. So this is a criminal matter when it gets to some of the tax fraud and some of the, there's criminal misrepresentation provisions in IRPA. It's not just, I'm getting my immigration fast tracked. You're creating major consequences. So that's a very good point. I do think it's a time to be extra careful, especially as the spaces narrow down.
Let's take a look at this whole thing with a different perspective. All right. So why does anyone want to come to Canada as an international student? Because the reason why I'm asking is because on my Instagram and some other platforms, we posted certain other videos about Mark Miller making some statements, and the comments below, that's where the most interesting conversations happen. And I want to know, why would anybody want to come to Canada to study, considering the quality of education that we provide here? How many institutions in Canada are actually in top 20, 50, 100, or even 200 for that matter? What is the quality of education that we are providing? And why is anyone looking to spend so much of money and going through all these processes, going through all these gray areas, unscrupulous agents, etc., 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 just to land on these Canadian shores to study? Is that, I mean, the education industry at this point of time is 26 billion plus industry. The DLIs, most of the bigger DLIs, have a very strong education lobby, which does influence a lot of these policy decisions. So for an international student who's out there, who's looking to come to Canada, why are they even coming to Canada if this is not going to be a pathway to anything permanent?
Well, Well, I don't think we should sell our institutions short. I mean, as someone who's the product of an international student, whose partner was an international student, I'm studying in a program now for my Master's of Law, and all my classmates are international students. I see both the excellence of the students and the excellence of this program and the opportunity it provides.
Sure.
Right. So that for me.
But how many such institutions? Well, I mean, how many institutions? That's what I said. How many of these institutions we can count in top 20, top 50, top 100 to top 200, and then say, okay, people are lining up to join these institutions because purely for the quality of. I'm not saying every single institution.
But does it have to be a ranking thing? Because frankly, the BCIT, I mean, I'm just putting BCIT as there, but those tech institutions that are creating, software people, developers, or the trade schools that are creating tradespeople. Frankly, even cleaners are making a lot of money these days too, right? Like if you think about it from an hourly perspective. So I mean, I don't think we should think about this T200 sort of. We have some very good institutions, film, for example, right? These are private institutions and they get much maligned, but Vancouver Film School here is brilliant, and it creates some of the top actors and actresses who end up working, or video game design, like the creatives, the arts, the culinaries. VCC has this like award-winning culinary school. Like there's so many of these amazing programs. And I think Canadian education is an export. I think we can't deny it. I think that you're very right though. If you take away that permanent resident carrot at the stick, or, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, whatever you want to call it, that folks actually get as some sort of success at the end of the day, how does that alter or change the dynamic or incentive to study? For me, though, I still think for those top students, it'll still exist, right? For those students who actually legitimately want to study, it will exist, because one degree is not the end, right? Canada to the US, Canada, Australia, folks go through different, global north countries to get top education. And if you're leaving a situation that is not as healthy, or that is in a war and instability, I mean, Canada still is globally, I mean, especially as the war unfolds in Gaza, you appreciate the safety, security, and comfort and things that we have here that we often take for granted a little bit more, right? So I think that premise, I believe that there's still that incentive. I do think though that this will cause folks a lot more panic and trepidation, and it'll create more mental health issues. It'll create a lot more of those negative things for folks or especially for folks who are here, who came in with this very clear game plan. I'm going to extend my status 1 year. I'm going to apply for this for 2 years, get a postgraduate work permit for 3 years. And then, my score will be this. Now that predictability of that kind of pathway is being thrown into the whirlwind a bit. And even the simple step of extension, which, in your hindsight, is supposed to be automated, and no one's going to get refused for extensions. Well, with this new income threshold, how's it going to factor into extensions, right? Are they looking at, okay, how much money does this person have to extend their status, right? And that's very much something that can be factored in. All those things can adjust, and so I do think folks that are here and folks that are looking to stay here are going to experience some hardship in the next little bit, unfortunately. That's
fair point.
It's inevitable.
Fair point. Yeah. Because from what little I understand in terms of how the visa offices assess the applications, there is, and of course, Stephen has also posted on his Twitter account a few times as to certain institutions having a higher credibility when students from those institutions are making an application for study permit. Absolutely. And these institutions, I mean, so it is understood that if you were to get an admission into these institutions, then because these institutions already have a high bar in the kind of applicants they were recruiting, therefore that gives them, or that puts a greater credibility on the applicants, and therefore their study permit approvals are much better. Would you say the same thing? I mean, obviously we can't say the same thing for all the institutions, right? Because that's not how it's applied across the board.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where I think applicants have to be very extra careful now, because, those are the schools where the admissions and the letters of acceptance were kind of being handed out like candy, right? And sometimes it's, I mean, again, I'll try to be careful not to throw too many names out there, especially when it comes to negative light. But, some of these institutions are called universities, or like, it's not even just in the name per se, right? They look on surface like they're very, very credible institutions, but behind the scenes, in the data, these are being flagged as, high, schools where folks are disproportionately applying for asylum, or where there's a high rate of non-compliance based on reporting, which is interesting, right? Because reporting, it could be twofold. One could be the students in that school, but it also could be the institution itself being just really terrible at reporting, right? So that's another thing that I have some query about when it comes to data. But, if I am a student from India where, the refusal rates are going up, and my agent has secured me admission to a school, I want to be researching that school. I want to be looking up whatever I can find about the reports. I want to be on Steve Byrne's Twitter. I want to be reading your stuff, Kubir, and figuring out, okay, this school has been flagged as a problem school in all these reports in the news media. Maybe for myself as a 40-year-old, second career person who's looking to enter a postgraduate diploma, 15, 20 years later, it might not be the best school for me to apply to at this time, because I will probably get refused. And maybe for my 40-year-old who is a mature student, I need to be going to a top university, trying to secure a scholarship, doing an MBA at a very reputable university. But then with the flip side, it could be more money. Admissions might not come that easy, right? But that kind of thinking at least will preserve, I think, better outcomes. I think too many folks blindly accept what their agents have found them in terms of the schools, and they just think, okay, I'm going to Canada, this must be a leading university or institution, without recognition that this is on a bit of a, I won't go blacklist, but just a list that creates problems for immigration. So I don't know, what are your thoughts? Do you think that that's a fair thought?
Well, I mean, to share my thoughts, I would just go back to the main subject for today's video, and that was what challenges international students who are planning to come to Canada would face. And to sort of take this discussion further as to what, and to your point as well, if international students are going to consider this as one foot in the door to your permanent residence, then that's no longer going to be true. If they haven't conducted their research, if they haven't done their homework, and they blindly follow the corner store education agent who is selling them the quick one-day approval or acceptance letter, and based on that they arrive in Canada, and at the port of entry, when the border officer asks them what subjects are you have taken, and you cannot even answer that simple question, then if things do not happen the way you want them to happen, then don't blame anybody else but yourself for it. So that is what I would say to something like that, because if you haven't conducted the research, then you cannot blame anybody else. You just cannot say, okay, Canada is bad, Canada did this to you. Canada did not do this to you. You are doing it to yourself. You're willing to spend the money. Your parents are willing to spend the money, but you're not ready to do the hard work which is required. So, for example, I mean, now that the postgraduate work permit extensions are no longer being announced, and there is somebody who is asking if they will be announced for 2024. No. Do you think another extension of full-time working policy for international students will be extended up to December 24? So this is, I guess, with regards to Mark Miller's announcement, where he said that international students can work until the end of April. Do we think it will be extended till end of December? I don't think it would be. And the reason for that is, again, because of how the sentiment in the market is. But if an international student comes to Canada, and then, I mean, of the ones whose work permits are not being extended, I mean, I've been doing so many of these consultations where people say that their work permits are expiring in January or February or March, and what are their options? And the first thing that strikes me is that, what were you waiting for? I mean, now, 1 month before the expiry of your work permit, now you are asking this question: what are my options? What should I be doing? There is nothing that, for some reason, a lot of people feel that we have some hidden doorways or magical keys. I mean, if you book a consultation, I will be open that hidden door for you. It's not like that. The hidden door is the research that you must have conducted, or you should have conducted from the get-go. The day you got your acceptance letter, before you even go up to the education agent to sign up, you should know what you want to do. You should know what your subjects are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you want to pursue, what is your ambition, what is your long-term goal, why Canada. And
Yeah.
every single thing that you write in your SOP or statement of purpose, if you actually believed it, instead of using a chat GPT or a SOP writer, if you actually
Yeah.
believed it, 9 out of 10 cases, you would not be disappointed. You would actually find success because you would make it work. For everybody else, it's going to be a tall task. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. I mean, as we move forward, as we go into 2024, I mean, as it is, I guess I get a lot of trolls for saying that I'm very negative, though I am forever hopeful.
Yeah.
But the negativity doesn't come from me. The negativity comes from the writing on the wall, which says that
Yeah,
permanent residence
exactly.
pathways are going to be more difficult. And if you
Yeah.
haven't already done your groundwork, if you haven't already geared up to take it head on, then
Sure.
you're going to find it very
Oh,
difficult.
for sure. Yeah, and if you ever see, I mean, I just tell you people, if you see someone being too positive in these times with a website that advertises a 99% success rate, like run the other way as fast as possible, right? Just because no one has a 99% success rate, right? Doing this work, right?
Yeah.
And even, I mean, even if your SOP is written like it could be an entry letter to Harvard University or whatever, it still doesn't, and we'll get to this conversation on Chinook, but it doesn't make a difference anymore, right? Like if the data is written on the wall, they may not even barely touch on your SOP, right? In the few minutes that they have. So I think folks need to adjust their expectations. But I think that other thing, Kabir, that you said that's really, really important. A lot of folks are getting into this need for advice way too late in the conversation. I think that starts, as you said, from day one, before they even think of their plan. And sometimes you know the person that's closest to you, or the person who speaks the same language necessarily, or is from the same town as you, might not be the best person for the advice, right? Cast a bit of a wider net. For those, I mean, some countries block Google, but if you have Google, like search up folks that are in Canada, search up folks that are, appearing and putting themselves out there with correct information, who have the paperwork and the licenses to back that up, and get some advice. And sometimes that advice might not be hopeful advice, and it might be very critical advice, but take that advice in a positive manner, because these folks likely are not there just to make the quick dollar. I can't tell you how many times, right, I could have made much, much more money by holding someone's hand down a pathway that has no end, that I would know they would just get into one problem after another, end up getting refused, go to litigation, do this, that, the other. And especially as a lawyer, you have even more tools at your disposal to create the income. But for me, if I'm seeing that there's no pathway for you, I'm always saying, if I were in your shoes, and I always think through that lens, if I were in your shoes and I'm advising myself who's in your shoes, what would I do? And in many times with those consultations, the advice is wait for this, wait a couple years, figure out this other pathway. It might take you a little longer time, but that's the best route, right?
Yeah.
And
the thing is, people want easy answers. People want easy pathways. So one of the frequent question is, what is the easiest way to get a PR? Or what is the fastest? There is no easy way. There is no fast way. I mean, if somebody's selling you that, then run. But nobody wants to do the hard work. But you know what? Let's address this question. Will, he says, Kuber, do you have any idea of job market and economy? No, I absolutely not. I live under a rock. I keep a blanket on my head all the time. I mean, how the hell would I know anything to do with job market and economy, right? Do you know anything about job market or economy, Will? We lawyers, consultants, we all live under a rock, right? We have no clue. Canada is not worth it, even with all the planning. It's a share you make a living being a consultant.
What's a share?
Well, you want to address it first, or do I get a go at it this one?
I'll start first, and I'll pass it to you. I'm in Vancouver. For all of you who know about Vancouver, it's one of the most expensive cities in the world, right? And and even as a lawyer, I mean, again, as I mentioned, preface that I'm not a profit machine, and it's been, frankly, a very difficult time in the last couple months, especially with the government's announcements. I mean, I have Indian clients. Like the source countries where my clients are from are either in some sort of political turmoil, people don't want to leave, or the government doesn't want them, right? Or they're from countries where the currency has been so devaluated that they just can't even afford legal fees anymore, right? And I'm trying to adjust accordingly. So no, it's not a prosperous, and we're heading probably to a period of further recession, if I'm being very honest. That being said, like, for me, it's still, folks have stories and lives and dreams to be met. And, I think that I know so many folks who've come to Canada and found, just one of our friends recently bought her home. She started from, very much a village in China to now buying her own home. And there are still those dreams and those success stories. And I think people will chase them and continue to chase them. And I think just people have to be more rational in understanding that. But at the same time, who's to stop someone from chasing that? Right. So I do think, I think Canada's worth it, because I wouldn't frankly live anywhere else in the world. I found my family and my home and my kids' future home and here. And I do wish it for so many folks that they could find this kind of peace, but it does come at a cost. And I don't think it's as granted as it used to be. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so it's a share you make a living being a consultant. Well, that is your opinion. I became a consultant because I came to Canada. So, that's the way I look at it. That's the first one. I had no background in law. I had no background in anything to do with immigration or anything to do with education, for anything for that matter. I was in aviation. I was in HR. I was in hospitality. I did all kinds of different businesses before I even came. Immigration happened to me, as far as I'm concerned. And I have seen so many people, my family, my friends, extended families, extended friends, so many of them who have found Canada to be so much worth it. To answer the question, is it even worth it? So if you're looking for a perfect place, well, probably after your eyes are closed permanently, maybe you might find it. But other than that, there is no such thing as a perfect place on earth. That's the first thing. A place is not what makes it worth it. It's you who makes the place worth it. And if you cannot do that, you can absolutely make the place wherever you are currently, your home country. You can do better there as well. Yeah. Where if you cannot find peace, in wherever you want to go to, then you cannot find peace anywhere. And as far as the job market is concerned, job market will always fluctuate. And what do you think Canada is? Canada may be the second largest country in the world, but the population is only 40 million people. What are you expecting? With 40 million people as a total population for such a huge landmass, are you expecting that the jobs will be raining across the world? I mean, it's not going to happen. So do some math. Understand the economy yourself. Probably that will give you a better answer for this question. But other than that, Canada is worth it for so many more things than just jobs and economy. Clean water, for example. I mean, after a few years, if there is a war in the world, it will happen because of water, right? Canada has already won it because it is the largest country. I mean, it's a country which has the largest resource in terms of clean water, clean air. I mean, if you come from certain countries in Asia and subcontinent, you would have forgotten the meaning of the word clean air. People pay for a can, for an oxygen can to sort of just inhale some oxygen. People pay for that. Here I get it for free. For me, this is absolutely worth it. I do not know about you. And if you're only looking for economy and job market, in my case, I make it happen for me. In your case, I do not know what to do.
Yeah, for kids, right? Even think about kids, like just your children. Like, where do you want to raise them? Anywhere in the world. I mean, I always come back to that question because I have 2 daughters now, and that's, the future, my legacy. I want them in a place where they will be respected and they have the world of their opportunity that respects women, that gives them opportunity, that I think there's no other place in the world that, in my mind right now, that I feel comfortable in. So I completely agree with you. But who knows? I haven't seen a lot of places in the world too either. So.
but for me, I mean, to defend myself on this one, I have lived in several countries. I have lived across the Middle East. So I've lived in Dubai. I've lived in Bahrain. I have lived in Kuwait. I've lived in Qatar. So different countries there. I've lived in Malaysia. I've lived in Singapore. I've lived in Myanmar. I'm not even sure a lot of people have even heard of Myanmar for that matter, but it's a beautiful country. Within this part, I've spent a lot of time in the US, but now I'm living in Canada. So I've had a fair bit of exposure in terms of how the life can treat you in different parts of the world. But that doesn't mean one country is better than the other. It's where you find your heaven. That's how it's going to be. And as far as IT industry is concerned, well, you do your research, figure out which countries are best for IT. Right now, India is boiling with startups, right? It's such a beautiful place to be for startups because there is so much of attention there. So should you leave India and come to Canada because you want to start your startup here in Canada, and then because it's not working for you, then you say Canada is bad? No, it's you. It's you did not do your research well. So probably that's the way to look at it. And yeah, somebody says freedom of expression. Yeah, sometimes actually people misuse it, I would say. But yes, freedom of expression really matters. Coming back to what we were talking about, Will, because we have the last few minutes to go to.
Yeah.
As an international student who's preparing to submit his application and keeping in mind the artificial intelligence, something which is your favorite subject, right?
Yeah, I'm doing my master's on it. So I'm dabbling.
Is it true that the AI actually weeds out applicants which have been flagged? Or, for example, I mean, I would assume AI should be able to identify template format of applications, SOP, submissions, and is able to identify unauthorized practitioners.
I think the technology is increasing. I do want to preface that we get.
Will, I think your microphone, something went wrong with your microphone. I think there's a lot of disturbance. You want to sort of check your audio settings again?
Test. Good. No,
there's a lot of disturbance. You want to check your audio settings in a bit?
My audio it's still on the microphone. Here, I can change it. Is it still not working?
Yeah, because there's a lot of disturbance on the microphone suddenly. I'm not sure what happened there.
Oh, really? Okay.
Now better. Oh, okay. Now we're good. Okay. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no worries. Apologies for that. So, first of all, what we're learning for most of our stuff is a year or two later because of the way the government has held a lot of these technologies tightly, right? So, I can't speak to like what they're doing exactly right now, but in terms of like tracking the IP addresses and of ghost consultants knowing where applications are being submitted from, I've seen enough of that tracking stuff to think that they know where applications and their IPs are. They collect that. They know if you're, for example, an agent submitting 500 applications as they pretend to be the individual from one location. I think they have enough to do that, right? So those are things I could flag for sure. In terms of their ability to flag other keywords, the way that they do things is a lot, again, through data. They've analyzed who are the kind of historical problem makers in the system that create adverse outcomes, that have high risk, that create security concerns. They input that in the system so the applications will flag that, right? And that's not all done by AI. Some of that is manual, just officer risk flagging. And then the AI portion comes in sorting the applicants into the approval bin of the tier one if it's a temporary resident application, or the green bin if it's a permanent resident application. So where I see these systems going are, first of all, for applicants to do whatever they can to maximize the positive factors in their application, right? And the problem with that, though, is some of us don't even know what they are, because there are flags and there are criteria that don't seem on the face to be things that should be flagged. For example, knowledge of English, right, is a factor, and it doesn't work in the way you think it does in terms of whether that puts you into one tier or the other tier, right? So people are going to continue to try to game the system. But for example, if you can get a US visa, because let's say you've already traveled, you have travel history or whatnot, get a US visa, right? If you have a legitimate reason to go to US, get one of those visas. We hold that in high regard, right? Yep. That's a very good strategy if you want to consider Canada and you have fear. If you have negative history, well, you have to address it in an application, right? But the AI stuff is definitely sorting out the small subsection of the applications that are lower risk. And the concern becomes if that visa office or decision maker say, we only want to see those folks in Canada. We don't want to see even the intermediate risk ones or the high risk ones. We just want the low to no risk ones. If that becomes the way that these systems are operating, yes, AI is not making your final decision, but all of the other factors are limiting only those decision cases that are treated by AI are being approved, right? And that's a very, very, it's hard to think through sometimes, but that's the way I feel the system is going. I don't think they're going to automate refusals yet, because I think that part, they have too many hoops to jump through. It can create too many issues with litigation. But if they just delay or they refuse folks that are from medium to low risk, high risk categories, inevitably it has a very similar outcome, right? Of having certain folks approved and certain folks refused. So again, do your homework and seek consultation from experts that can actually discuss this with you, right? Because some other folks will say, you know what, pay me $5,000. I will write you the most incredible SOP. It'll sound like you're the world's most amazing person. Well, what if I told you that the way that they process applications, right, makes it so that SOP gets at maximum 1 to 2 minutes of the officer's time? How does that change the way you put together that 30-page essay where you have your, life story written on page 20, right? Or how does that change the way you copy and paste that ChatGPT post that, Canada has a beautiful environment and lovely water and you want to stay here and smell roses for the rest of your life? Well, it alters it, right?
Yeah.
You need to be able to, in 1 to 2 minutes, if an officer is anywhere on that gray area of tier 2, capture and grab their attention, right? And that does take a specific type of SOP writing or application organizing, right? If those days of just throwing everything into an application or throwing nothing into an application, frankly, those are the two extremes, are over, right? You can't just throw everything in there and expect the officer to parse through, a 50-page PDF. But at the flip side, if you write nothing in your application, you might be in the same boat. So I see Ibad's question about how would AI conflict legal framework hasn't been regulated yet. EU is considering it under a legal framework. Yes, the EU has been really leading the push on this.
Yep.
And I don't know how much Canada, I think we're going to follow and we're going to listen, but we're still even figuring out for our own domestic AI regulation. So I still think we're many steps away from the government actually coming out with something that is enforceable. That's why we prefer to deal with it in soft law, because it's very malleable and it's flexible. So I think we're always going to be harsher on private use of AI than known government's use of AI, because I think the benefits of the AI for IRCC have just been way too much, right? Like their ability to move through organized bulk process. And Chinook, again, there's this whole debate, is Chinook AI? In the beginning, I came out with the Chinook is AI piece. And then, over the time, I've read some more stuff. And I still think there are AI components built within Chinook, such as Module 5.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's a disposal unit, right? And cases that are not picked up by AI to automate approvals and are brought into a spreadsheet in Chinook. That spreadsheet in Chinook knows if AI has been used or not. So this idea that the officer doesn't know if a case has been tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3, I don't believe it, right? And that leads to cases being refused in mass and with very reasons that don't attach to the application content. So
for example, if someone was to do ample research on the way this AI is being used by IRCC and Canada, do you think they could prepare their application to combat or battle the way AI is assessing these applications?
I'm beginning to feel less and less, and this is terrible because I do this for a living, right? For the last however many years, went to law school. I think I'm a very solid writer when I can be. I can provide a really good story, right?
Yeah.
But how much of that matters anymore?
Yeah.
If the data is on the wall, and I'm going to be sharing a post later, so for those who want to follow, I'm going to be putting a blog post up shortly, either today or tomorrow, about Sri Lanka, and this is from 2021. So again, almost 3 years ago now, January 2021. The amount of data they mined about, in this case, Sri Lankan students making refugee claims is astronomical. Like, they know the time it takes for them to make a claim, their non-compliance rating, their what cities they're going to, what institutions they're attending. I think they even have gender-based stuff. So they have all this data from immigration applications, their forms, and their software. So when another student comes in from Sri Lanka who's Tamil, and again, that's just the context of where we saw it,
yeah,
right? I, as a lawyer, want to write this really beautiful, loving piece about how my individual is actually like leading a volunteer organization in Sri Lanka for Tamils and wants to go back and start her organization after she gets her whatever degree.
Yeah.
But are they going to take my word or her word or the legal submission word, or are they going to take the data's word for it? And the data says this person is going to have an adverse outcome, and with an 80 to 90% certainty rate. So that's the way that the battle is now, is the data is going to tell a story that's likely very different from your client's story. You're going to try and tell your client's story, but the systems that filter the application are going to largely favor that data story, right? So, and even the courts now, frankly, are fed up, right? Because they're delayed and there's way too many people judicial reviewing. It's become almost like, it's a very fruitless practice, frankly.
Imagine.
So what do you do? And then each refusal subsequently locks you in further into the merry-go-round of refusals. So unfortunately, I see it as a discriminatory practice, but I think that's going to be the reality for many international students now. So don't think you're a top candidate at any point without really having some data or finding some advice to confirm that, right?
Okay, yes, thank you so much for that. Okay, just to sum up today's session, the very last one here is obviously Mark Miller. I'm just coming back to the beginning of today's session and the video where I said Mark Miller's recent announcement where he said in early 2024, I'm sure early January, he will announce the framework and how he intends to rein in the international foreign workers. Do you think it's going to impact the postgraduate work permit issuances as well, or will there be any restrictions? What have you understood, and what have you, or rather, what can you foresee for something like that to happen?
Yeah, and again, I haven't been as involved because I was in school the last little bit with the university, the kind of international education folks who've been at the roundtables. But from what I've filtered through is that the government's focus is on supporting those who are here and really curbing those who are trying to come here, right? So if we take that as a starting point, I think there may be, and I think the government has to balance out with every kind of negative measure a bit of some sort of positivity. So I do think that there may be some positive adjustments to the PGWP. There may be some longer PGWPs issued for certain folks, right? This idea, the kind of US style for certain professions in STEM or something, you might get a longer postgraduate work permit. I do think something like that is, given all the extensions they've been doing anyways, would make some sense, right? So maybe if you're in a STEM profession, for example, or certain trades or occupations, government has the data for, we're giving you 5 years instead of 3, right? We don't have to give you an extension for 2 years afterwards. After 3, we give you 5 right off the bat. So I think they're going to do some sort of that kind of minor maneuvering, right? But again, it's going to be very targeted, and I don't think everyone's going to benefit equally. So that's why, for me, those big raw numbers of like Canada's going to reduce this portion by this number, it's important in the bigger scheme of things, but I think we got to micro in on who's benefiting and who's going to be kept out of those systems, right? Okay. So that's where I think things are going.
No, even I agree to an extent. I'm not sure how much of restrictions would come for postgraduate work permits, especially now because there has been no announcements earlier. So for people who can now be caught on the negative side of the decision, so I'm not expecting postgraduate work permit restrictions as of right now. But yes, by and large, I do expect more restrictions in terms of what kind of work permits may be approved going forward. They would be probably more focused on terms of occupation, on terms of industry types, on terms of connecting it with the kind of education you have completed versus what kind of path you wish to follow.
Yeah.
Lots to take in as we move into next year. Will, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
I love putting you on the spot for a lot of these questions, and you do so extremely well with those things. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we should hopefully have you again here next year when we talk more about these things as they happen.
Will do. Happy New Year in advance to you and your followers and friends and all of our folks across the world. And just during this time of such uncertainty, I really hope that good health and finding that peace that we discussed is a priority for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays and for remaining holidays, and I wish you and your family a very happy New Year as well.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Right, that was Will, so gracious with his time this morning, even amongst his holidays. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. As usual, we'll keep doing this as and how more updates, more news, more things come forward. But for this point of time, the only keyword in today's session was research. If you're planning to come to Canada and if you haven't researched, you might find this pathway to be much more difficult than you would have imagined. Thank you for joining in. I wish you all the very best, and I shall see you on Saturday for another live stream when we talk more about this week's updates. Take care and have a good day.